Good evening and welcome to the USC Architecture Fall 2021 Public Event Series. I'm Milton Curry, Dean of the USC School of Architecture, and Adela and Harry McDonald, Dean's Chair in Architecture. And I want to first thank Cynthia Pena, our events coordinator, and Professor Alvin Wang, Public Events Committee Chair and Director of Graduate and Post-Professional Degree Programs at our school, who will moderate our Q&A immediately following Bruce's remarks. I want to start by saying that one of the things I've been saying with respect to being in a state of becoming a citizen architect is to have your finger on the pulse of contemporary culture. And that doesn't mean, or it doesn't only mean self-identifying which Netflix series that you're currently binge watching. It also means extending your intelligence, not knowledge, but our collective and individual intelligence, extending that on how life is becoming more or less human and how our interaction with the real world is becoming more humane or less humane. Our speaker this evening has had his finger on the pulse of culture for over 40 years. As a professor, academic, designer, architect, and creative thinker. Full disclosure, he's also been a close personal friend. On a personal level, Bruce's heritage, cultural background, and personal journey has been nothing short of tremendous. He said recently that it's taken a lifetime to become Canadian. And just sit with that for a moment. He grew up in Canada. His family was interned in World War II in British Columbia. These life experiences make him not only one of the most talented designers and architects working today, but also an empathetic and empathic designer who is now able to think about indigeneity and aspirational culture through the lens of an immigrant, native, outsider, insider, simultaneously. This ability to hold different positionalities in suspension while occupying or inhabiting one or multiple positions to see the world and the cultural moment, this too can constitute the consciousness of a citizen architect. Bruce Kuwabar is a founding partner of KPMG Architects and the chair of the Canadian Centre for Architecture in Montreal. In 2006, he was awarded the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada Gold Medal. In 2012, he was invested as an officer of the Order of Canada for shaping our built landscape in lasting ways. The portfolio of Bruce and his studio and KPMG Architects encompasses cultural, civic, educational, hospitality, and healthcare projects, quite a broad range, and also spanning interior and full building scale projects and urban design projects. Some notable cultural work includes Canada's National Ballet School, the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ottawa, and the Rimet Modern Art Gallery in Saskatchewan. Educational projects include the Julius Romo Rabinowitz Building and Louis A. Simpson International Building at Princeton University, and the Destination Project at the University of Lethbridge in Alberta, Canada. He's led design teams for the Canadian Embassy in Berlin, and working on an integrated design team, he designed the Manitoba Hydro Place, which is a global exemplar for high-performance, lower-energy building, and I believe 100% fresh air, which is amazing. He's worked on LEED Platinum projects, including Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, other projects, the Bay Adelaide East Tower and the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern School University. And Bruce leads interdisciplinary teams to deliver large-scale neighborhood projects. This work includes the Athletes Village for the Pan-Parapan Games in 2015, which is now the Canary District in Toronto, and the Pier 8 waterfront development in Hamilton. Current projects and current clients include the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, the Contemporary Calgary Art Gallery, expansion, renovation, and buildings at Boston University. It's really a pleasure to be able to welcome Bruce here. I wish it were in person, but nevertheless, he's here virtually, and I want you to please join me in welcoming him to our School of Architecture. Bruce?
Thank you so much, Dean Curry. It's a pleasure to be here. Before I start, I want to acknowledge the ancestral and traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Wendat peoples. The territory is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This land and Toronto, also known as Tkaronto, where we meet, is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and we are grateful to gather and work on this land today. This is a starting point for me, which is really about understanding the relationship between architecture and society. And it's been a journey for me, as it is for all of you. But I think it's something that as architects, we have to really understand that architecture is not autonomous and that it has a relationship to how we live together. And that may be its most important mission, to really think through all of the issues of society. And it takes a village, a team of people. Here we are on an outdoor rooftop pre-pandemic with an office that reflects the diversity of one of the most multicultural cities in the world, one of the few countries that is still open to immigrants. And it produces a different kind of work, a different kind of thinking. Our workspace, which is relatively new, is really a kind of loft. And I'm actually in this space, which is our lounge right now, which we're using for a lot of lectures and video conferencing. But it's no longer the idea that you're just working at your desk in a cubicle. I think so much of the creative work that we're looking forward to in the post-pandemic is actually immersive. And you need people around you, you need books, you need magazines, you need models, materials, but most of all, you need people. And I've done a lot of thinking, and as I think all of you are encountering, that the very idea of collaboration, how does it actually work? You have to understand it to be part of it. I'm very interested in how people work together with shared goals. And then we use the walls. We still have a lot of paper, even in this digital world, and we leave those drawings up, because one thing I really don't like with the screens is that you don't see everything all at once. And I think it's really, really important to see all aspects of your work while you're doing it. You can theorize it and you can design it, but you have to have it all around you. When I've presented in the past, I've talked a lot about city building. And I use this phrase, which I coined, every building implies a city, which is really about thinking about community and urbanity. And there's a list of 7 themes that organize a lot of the work that we did in the past, and certainly in the first part of the century. And there they are, and they're all really germane to the way we were thinking about how to make architecture in cities. So public realm, I've had the privilege of working on 3 city halls in Canada, and it was very much about making the public space, the idea that you need to create the space of appearance where people appear to live out their lives as citizens, to act, to protest, to celebrate, to just hang out, and to meet. In Toronto, we had the honor of designing the Toronto International Film Festival. And it's right across the street from where we used to work. It's a hybrid building. the Toronto International Film Festival occupies 5 floors. There's an outdoor roof terrace, and then a condominium, which was part of the hybrid of the economics of the project. Because Ivan Reitman, the filmmaker, his family owned the site. They teamed with the developer. They teamed with the Toronto International Film Festival. And this building has kind of changed the public landscape around it and has become the epicenter for film making, education, presentation. And we begin to see the intertwining of some of our interests, like the vertical integration of buildings, the stacking of elements, the expression of elements within the hybrid. You can see the cinemas projecting onto the street in the slide on the right. The offices are above. There's an event space underneath the cascading stair. An early vertical campus, one of the most important projects, I think, that speaks volumes about the city of Toronto. It's a mixed use development with residential behind it, but the part we worked on was the dance studios for the National Ballet of Canada. We incorporated heritage buildings along Jarvis Street, and it really became inspired as from a photograph that Thomas Struth took, which was of a family of different ages, generations, genders. I mean, it was very, very interesting. And for me, that was kind of an inspiration for an ensemble cast of buildings that would present in the city. The dance studios are all receiving natural light, and we wanted to make a building in this vertical campus where you could get out at several levels, and you would not have to even put a sign on it to understand this building is about dance. In our national capital, we were working on the transformation of Canada's oldest museum. It's a 1910 building, so that tells you how young Canada is. But where the glass lantern is standing was a stone load-bearing tower designed by Canada's first public works architect. And Ottawa has terrible soil conditions, so that tower actually began to tilt and slip into the ground. And so it was taken away almost as soon as the building was built. It was the tragedy of the architect's career. And it was that stayed that way for 100 years until we came back with the idea of the lantern. And you can see the scissor stair, the butterfly stair inside that lantern, right at the juncture between the glass and the stone. It links all of the circulation around an interior atrium. It's a really beautiful building. On the left, you noticed the trefoil pattern in the stone building, and David Ewart's what was called the stump, and then our new glass lantern, which is structural glass. It's actually hung from the roof. The scissor stair goes up in it. It's used for art installations, and high school students sing. It has great acoustics, so choirs come and sing on our stair. Transit-oriented development. We won the competition in Montreal in 2000. It's 1 million square feet with 3 major departments of Concordia University, not one parking space. It's connected into the Montreal metro system, and the campuses like NYU are totally integrated with the streets of the city. The streets of Montreal are really incredible. So this is really transit-oriented development in our terms, where the interior of the building that takes you to subways is really like almost outdoors, and hence the picnic tables. Thomas Sauer presented to USC Manitoba Hydro, and this building is really an exemplar of how to create a passive, very healthy building. I'd say this is the healthiest building that we've designed. It's very relevant in this pandemic because it has 100% fresh air. It has windows that open. It has a geothermal system. It has no recycled air. See the solar chimney, that's the exhaust. In the winter, we gather the air that is in the office work slabs and take it down and heat the garage below. And then I'm very interested in this idea of formatting whole neighborhoods of cities. This is in my hometown. We won the competition. We're working with other architects and it's been fantastic because some of them had worked with us and had set up their own practices, but this is ongoing. This is one of the ways in which you can achieve, I think, a kind of coherent diversity where the expressions are all different, but there is a unifying idea around the public realm. Okay, I'm going to present 4 projects. 2 are the most recent vertical campuses that we're working on, and the last 2 are art galleries. But I wanted to give you a sense of the buildings that I think are the most important buildings that I'm working on today. So we won this competition quite a while ago, 5 years ago. It was put on hold. It then came back on. It's for BU. It's right on Commonwealth Avenue, and it's net zero. So BU is a narrow stretch on the Charles River across from Harvard and MIT. You know, Olmsted's great Commonwealth Avenue comes through and becomes not so nice, actually, when it comes through BU. But we're right on the river. And BU's proposition is that data sciences are the tool for problem solving in every discipline of the university, and they created a faculty for data sciences. It's the white rectangle within the long yellow campus color. Here's our building, an aerial, and you know, Boston and the Back Bay, it's red brick. The School of Business is the big building on the right, and far to the upper left is Jose Luis Sert's beautiful tower. I liked that when I was a student, and it's now the Faculty of Law. Our building sits between them, and we had to frame an argument for its form, its height in Boston, which, you know, is really quite conservative place. But we created a vertical campus, taking all the lessons we had learned, and we wanted to bring Commonwealth Avenue, the sidewalks that are so busy, up into the building. So these are just a series of a concrete core. It's a steel building with a square floor plate that shifts around and takes advantage of the laneway that BU owns, pushes it right onto the corner, creates a series of stacks of 2 and 3 stories, much like traditional campuses. So they're lower buildings, but they're stacked, and every shift creates an outdoor space with a different orientation and the image of the building right to the top. And at the very top, there's an outdoor courtyard. And then there's a kind of spiraling of exterior solar shading around the building. And I'll explain that a bit further. The pavilion on the lower roof is all about food and the river. So here's the elevation perspective where the ascent on those terraces is an extension of the sidewalk, and it goes up into the lower floors, which are accessible. They're university-wide classrooms, and then you get engineering, mathematics, and up at the very top, the Hariri Institute. There's an interconnecting stair, top to bottom. It's 18 stories. We don't expect people to walk 18 stories, but we do expect them to walk 1 or 2 floors and not always use the elevators. You can see how it's carefully knit into the fabric of the laneway, Bay State Road, the existing open spaces. We're trying to create porosity and animation and vibrancy on Commonwealth. A perspective view, this very recent, so you get a stair that is really high traffic for university-wide classrooms. And then up in the tower, we clad the concrete core with white gloss that you can write on. So you're writing on the walls. We want people to be in the public spaces of the building. There's a lot of glass. It's actually very much like our office, actually. And the interconnecting stair goes through at the very top. There's an outdoor roofless courtyard, but the glazing contains its, you know, really to dealing with wind. And just the facade idea is there are 2 conditions: a deeper double bay off of the square core, which is continuous in a single bay. On the double bay, we worked with Transolar to develop diagonal louvers that are integrated with the unitized curtain wall system. And you're looking at the bottom at the southwest corner. So they're angled out. That's why you get this kind of chevron pattern. When the building is shifted the other way, and you only get a single bay. As you see in the right, you just get offices or faculty offices, and we then shift to a vertical system with a very reduced glazing ratio. And these are the mock-ups. We're really excited about this. You see the diagonals on the left, you get the mirroring of the opaque spandrel pieces, which are on an angle. It's quite active. It's a building that's got some jump to it, but it has an idea with every aspect of it, top to bottom. Here's from the inside when you see the two systems. And then from the outside. And then under construction, the terraces where collaboration will be, and it's right on Commonwealth Avenue. And then this great picture, looking at it, you're seeing temporary structure holding up the steel. It'll then be removed and you'll see the building and its spiraling form. This is how we're achieving net zero. It has everything that Manitoba has, Manitoba Hydro, but it has resiliency because of the proximity to the river. And BU owns a wind farm in Midwest United States, and that's how we get to net zero. The building does a lot, but you never get all the way, and then you need an offset. So that's what we're doing. And our argument was our relationship to Jose Luis Sert's building, beautiful on the right, Cram's building, Collegiate Gothic, and then way off on the left, I.M. Pei's project that's so important. Okay, the second vertical campus, we won in another competition, and we worked with Transolar and an American firm, Trainer, out of Kansas City, who specialize in labs. And this is about brain science and really the absolute need to really understand, the relationship between brain health, mental health. And so the red dot shows where the site is. In the 19th century, it was put as far away from the downtown. It was out of sight, out of mind. It was housed, the asylum was housed in a 19th century building by a very good architect, British, John Howard. The inmates were forced to build a brick wall around the whole compound to keep themselves in. You see it on the right. And if you look at that wall, the remains of that wall, you see their names scratched onto it. It's very, very moving. And it's an element which has created incredible debate, public debate. Should it all come down? Should it stay? But there was the people who fought for it to stay actually won an argument there, even though the 19th century building was torn down. I've worked on this project for 20 years. This was our competition scheme 20 years ago. Queen Street, which is a very active high street, is on the bottom. Shaw Street is on the left. The trees that are in the residual park were once the trees in the 19th century. I call them the guardians of the site. And it was really a Jane Jacobs streets and blocks plan with smaller buildings. On the very far right, we did the first buildings, which were sort of residential buildings for people who are transitioning out of the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And it's a very wide spectrum. There are people who are really having serious issues. And there are others who are there's teenagers who are just suffering from depression. I mean, there's a full spectrum, but the buildings I'm going to show next are the ones we actually designed on. And we were just trying to make ordinary buildings. The residential walk-up apartment buildings and a flexible buff brick office building, community building. Queen Street's up at the far right there. But it sort of set the tone of trying to, quote, remove the stigma of the large institution. And then we finally, after many years, many phases of building out the other blocks with other architects, we were competing for the site that's on the bottom right of the site plan. And the site plan was pulling the streets of the city, you can see them up at the north, through the site. Very Jane Jacobs, city of small blocks. The big changer, the game changer will be in the bottom left. There's a transit station that goes right into the central rail station of Toronto. And that will, I think, change the nature of how people come to work, how patients and clients arrive, and certainly connect CAMH's campus to the campuses, the residential neighbors to the south. So you can see over in the bottom right, in the left, I'm working with Jennifer Nagai, a very talented landscape architect from Vancouver. And we were looking at flow. These are a series of sketches I did in the competition, which had to do with opening the wall, relating the new building to the wall, being able to see over the wall, behind the wall, and really beginning to think of massing. This is a very large building. It's like 400,000 square feet. But the fundamental move was to try to get light into the garden that would exist between the wall and the building. So there's a kind of impression that's being made to squeeze the plan. It's a 50,000 square foot floor plate, so it's huge. And there's some labs in it. This was a summary diagram of below grade, a concrete building, 2 stories. This were all medical testing, food. There's an auditorium. Sanctuary is a hybrid steel and timber building. And up top is a roof terrace and event space. And they call it the Beacon. And then a sketch I did of connecting this building above the wall to the CN Tower. And on the right, CAMH has really upped their game in terms of communicating and changing public attitudes about mental health. And frankly, it's about time. There's a big change going on. Donors would never give money to mental health projects, and they are now, because I think it's accelerated in the pandemic. These are the 4 ways in which you can really think about holistic design. You know, Transolar would say, think about your building as though it had no mechanical systems. Then you apply active systems very carefully. It's really about the culture of design. You need design teams that want to make buildings that are sustainable, and then it's behavior. At Princeton, we realized that you could make a 28% energy reduction just by the behavior of students and faculty. And then this became a metaphor. This is not where we started, but after we started giving shape to it, someone said, you know, this is really interesting. The collaboration spaces are like the corpus callosum, and it really is about all of the nerve endings that allow the hemispheres to actually connect your brain to function. What Milton was talking about, this is the most important thing for me, which is 100% fresh air, a building that breathes, windows that open. It has the outer skin of Manitoba Hydro. You can see it. It has underfloor displacement ventilation. We have pushing the air from above down. In a pandemic, you would never do that. We would just let the flow through, but it's 24/7, 365 days of the year, lots of natural light, wood interiors. Here's the competition image of the building with the central court, which is pushed way back. It produces outdoor terraces for collaboration. You see the concrete pavilion building, it's higher than the wall. That's a very important design idea. And then you see the warmth of the, what we call the sanctuary of research. Inside on the ground floor, you actually, even though Toronto's building like so much, you actually have a line of sight to the tower, that sense of connection to the downtown, and then a very open public hall, which is connected to the garden, to the backside of the wall. But in the middle of the building, this is where everything comes together. People, the cascading, another scissors there. I got to tell you, Milton, that I actually stole that from Raphael Moneo at the Davis Gallery at Wellesley, which we toured when I was doing a visiting instructor's role at the GSD. But I saw in this potential to organize movement and the exhaust system and bring in light and bring people together in a large floor plate. And it's essentially a grid, and the curvature is only on the perimeter and just a view. Okay, those were the 2 vertical campuses. And now we're going to have 2 art galleries. One that was done and opened in 2017, Ramey Modern. It's in Saskatchewan, Saskatoon. I've discovered the country through our projects, and it's fantastic to actually adjust your work to different climates and to different cultures and communities. So they said it had to be a winter haven. They said it should be a community living room and a hub. And then it's become an open field for indigenization. You know, Jan Martel wrote the book Life of Pi, and he lives in Saskatoon, and he wrote this, and we found this image. And for me, it was really about, the building is not nature itself. it's inspired by nature, but it's actually inspired by some proto-modern buildings like grain storage and just very geometric things that stand against nature, but are integrated. Here's the city plan. The South Saskatchewan River bends, and our building has prime time front row frontage on it. There's a park called River Landing, which the city had already completed. There's a commercial site across the street, which is now developed. And on our site, there was already a theater, a Persephone theater, a repertoire theater. And our building sat on the L-shaped site. It was very controversial. They closed down the Mendel Gallery and the collection moved to our building. We came in after that. You'll see up in the top right, the Bessborough Hotel, which is a railway hotel, which is one of the buildings that is really recognized and loved. So this town is a university town. There are bridges that are coming into the city. The facade faces due south, and that's a key piece of this. Here are 3 pictures. The Mendel Gallery, which was controversial and closed, it's been repurposed. The Railway Hotel in the middle with its copper roof, and then the Persephone Theater that is our neighbor. We're butting right up to it. When we went to the site, the first time my partner Shirley and I went to the other side of the river. If you ever get a site on a river, go to the other side and look at the site. And we saw strata, layers that were there in the landscape and in the existing buildings on the site. And that inspired us to really look at this as a series of datum lines and levels of the architecture. This is my sketch at the beginning with the bridge on the left, some public art on the right, and then essentially four levels. This is a very quick video study, but I thought it was worth showing. It has a kind of rawness to it that I really like, and our clients got really excited about this. And so it doesn't all have to be super finished and rendered. It has to be spatial, and it has to really convey the ideas of the project. We did a double cantilever on the corner, really presenting the building to the freeway. And that's because there were municipal services below ground and we had to pull our building back. And so we cantilevered to regain the space. These are the service areas. There's the back of the Persephone Theater. We're coming around again, looking due south. You know, the entrance pavilion is raised. You can drive a bus under there. That's how lots of visitors will be coming. And then there's a series of outdoor terraces overlooking the university and the South Saskatchewan River. You'll see some yoga happening on this roof in its built completion. That's the boardroom that gives out to that terrace. There's a 30-foot cantilever projecting right out over the park. All the offices are up at the uppermost level and it's slightly reflective. And some days it just disappears entirely. That's the multi-purpose room where people are standing on the second floor. And the rust colored became much more copper colored. It's a expanded steel plate. It's really for solar shading. We want our cake and eat it too. We want the view of the river, but we want to protect the building from solar gains. So here's the building complete. You see the Idlewild Bridge on the left. You see park pavilions we didn't design. You see buildings in the downtown, but our building is the front face of the downtown of, I think it has like 275,000 people. On the right, there's riverside walkways. People go there, jog, and we wanted a building that would be inviting to everyone. And at night in the winter, and it gets really cold there, that's when the building has to become the winter haven. Here's the rooftop that I was showing you before, overlooking the university. And then we even engaged the existing stairs that the city had designed to the front entrance where the bus drop-off was. But there are 2 entrances to this building. This is one, and you see the other one on the far left. So one of our strategies was that if you're there, you've never been in a gallery, you might come in for a coffee and find yourself in the gallery, in the cafe, and walk right through the building. But you may have that moment of friction and engagement. The blue Gallery 9 is where you'll see one of the installations. It's right on axis with the main entrance. Here's the section which was not preconceived, it was kind of carved out of the stacked bars, but to try to create an architectural promenade and light from the top. It's also our exhaust. And then some beautiful integrated art. Haig Young is a tremendous artist who uses Venetian blinds and really created a much more intimate center for the stair, the fireplace. And that fireplace is really used. So you get an indigenous artist, Lyndon Linklater, hosting fireside chats, and they're very popular. They've drawn a whole other community into the gallery. These are the original wall murals by Para Hudov, an artist who the original Fred Mendel had them commissioned for his office. And it's interesting that Para Hudov was a student of Les Enfants in Paris. And, you know, Le Corbusier did Les Enfants Studio. And when I look at these, I see the modular man. And then in that gallery 9 that I was saying, right on axis with the main entrance, when the building opened, Thomas Hirschhorn really made a commitment and basically did a long-term project at the gallery on the ground floor. And it was titled, "What Can I Learn from You? What Can You Learn from Me?" And there were people who had never been in an art gallery. There were all kinds of people who came in, and he basically had conversations daily for 6 weeks. And then another installation that I love, Pei White, she dissolved our stair from the 2nd to the 3rd floor, and I hope it's permanent because it's so fantastic. And then you see on the right, when you go to the elevators, we position them deep in the plan, but when you come out, you always look to the river. You always see the sky. It's always art in the context of nature and the city. And then on the 3rd floor, this is the really super deep cantilever, and then looking 2 ways up the river, and then the one on the right looking right out in the cantilever. But this was one of the early installations. So artists will always find a way to speak back. Recently, this is part of using the building entirely for indigeneity, that there was going to be a special gallery. And that's the last thing Indigenous artists want. They just want to exhibit their work. And I love this term, post-commodity. They're American and they're collective, and they really are raising the issue of water. There are many Indigenous communities that do not have drinkable water, and it's a shame. Okay, in Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was active from 2008 to 2015, and it was organized by the parties of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. And the commission was tasked with documenting the history and lasting impacts of the Canadian Indian residential school system on Indigenous students and their families. There were 94 calls to action regarding reconciliation between Canadians and Indigenous peoples, and we have lots of work to do. If you've been catching any news from Canada, because it's been almost every day, but there are over 1,000 unmarked graves of Indigenous children that have been discovered at residential schools in British Columbia and Saskatchewan. And Murray Sinclair, who was a senator in our government and who chaired the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, he actually thinks the estimate is closer to 10,000. This is the last project. It's a competition that we won in 2020. And the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia and the province of Nova Scotia on our East Coast, really wanted to think about new ways of thinking about art galleries. And it's on a waterfront site. And down on the lower band, you can see that we formed a very interdisciplinary team of our firm, Omar Gandhi, Jordan Bennett, who is Mi'kmaq and lives in Newfoundland, great artist, Lorraine Whitman, who is an elder who speaks for many of the Indigenous women's groups, certainly for the murdered and missing Indigenous women. So organizations, Public Work, Mark Ryan used to work for West 8, and then Transolar. Here's the East Coast, it's so beautiful on the Atlantic this time. And you see our site is on the waterfront where all the piers were. It was really the site of industrialization and colonialization. You see the Citadel, which is beautiful, but really representing the military. And you see across the way, Dartmouth. It's really extraordinary landscape. And then the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia has some really iconic Canadian artists, Alex Colville and Maud Lewis, in their collection, and they are greatly revered. But things are changing. The yellow dotted line was a competition site. It was an international call. We got shortlisted, and we had an incredible experience connecting people together to make something that no one would have made on their own. Here's the site in an aerial. There's a condo project, Bishop's Landing, on the middle of the site. The site is where the tents are. They use it for jazz festivals and markets and so on. There's an outer boardwalk. You can see it's quite successful. And then there's a street. The first street is Lower Water Street. And it has some great things like breweries, and but you know, Halifax also has some not so great buildings and modern development, and the downtown, which is off to the right. But we're trying to capture and to express a connection to the land. These are 3 diagrams when we were at an impasse. You have the colonial grid on the right. You have a spiral that Jordan Bennett drew as an artist about a gathering place. And then I was trying to resolve things with a kind of serpentine. I sketched these, which were really about 3 buildings, 3 pavilions, 4, 5 graduated, and making a kind of serpentine that would cup the exterior space and also connect with Lower Water Street on the left. And then Mark did this rather incredible drawing where he said that the building should be on the left, there should be an oculus, and then the tail of it should extend into the water. You'll see some incredible drawings that he did. We may not get that extension into the water, even though people loved it. But here it is. It's the serpentine cupping 2 spaces, a kind of a way of addressing the citadel, but also the water, connecting the city and the water, creating something that's very sustainable, very, very flexible. And the form of the building, I don't know if I can even describe it. The pavilions are there. There's this tall central one. We're changing that actually now. There's a notion of the serpentine in the elevation of the building. It's very challenging to make a reference, but also to keep it abstract enough that it's open to interpretation. There's rising seawater levels that we have to manage. This is a snapshot of how the building is organized. I like typologies of buildings, and you know, this is really about an outward look to the water. It's asymmetrical. There's a kind of back of house, front of house, and it's got great terraces on the water. This is Transolar's view, really kind of brilliant, that to be passive, you should only condition the spaces that really need to be conditioned, like the galleries for environmental control. But everywhere else, you see the top right diagram would be naturally ventilated. And we're arguing for it. It's not easy to persuade people who've only built hermetic buildings to all of a sudden have a natural building. But I think we're winning. We're starting to win the argument. The pandemic is helping us. And then a model that Omar's firm made, actually his accountant also happens to be a model builder, and what a model it was. Okay, so I'm going to begin, and this is the last piece of this. This was what we presented during the competition phase. And the speaker, the narrator, is Jordan Bennett, the artist. And our filmmaker is really an extraordinary up-and-coming filmmaker who's very much interested
We made
in
this for you.
issues of mental health.
We dreamt of a place for us. A place dreamt by an unlikely group of people who became friends in the process, made up of generational mentors and leaders in their respective communities. It happened at a tipping point in our world, a time that pushed back and demanded change, a new way forward, a new way of thinking. I want to tell you about a place. It's a place for us, all of us, Msitnogama, for all my relations. Listening to the teachings and directions of the original caretakers of this place, now known as Halifax, the Mi'kmaq. Myself, Jordan Bennett, with the guidance of grandmother white sea turtle, Lorraine Whitman, and Mi'kmaq elders have shared ancestral teachings and knowledge with our integrated design team. This place was built on a group of concepts, elements, understandings, and connections rooted in Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing. Nadumgalik, the Mi'kmaq concept of sustainability and respect for all living things, helps shape and foster the core values inside and out. The gallery's form, inspired by the body of Godao, or eel, forms the exterior and interior of the space, emerging from and entering into Jiboktok, the Great Harbor. With its canted grayish-blue terracotta skin, reflecting, shining, and aiding in regulating the space, the eel form exemplifies Nadumgalik. The eel is a measure of the health of its environment, and has always been significant to the culture, knowledge, and sustainable practices of the Mi'kmaq. The form allows the building to beautifully flow without colonial constraints, and seamlessly open to a landscape inspired by the coastline and ocean, a regenerative landscape that engages Jiboktok, a place where people learn, explore, and play, where innovative art, artists, and community are central and ever present. This place is a place to visit, a place where Mawiomis happen. Mawiomis, or gatherings, are integral to the design, a design that continues to bring people together to experience great art rooted in history that is provocative, challenging, and engaging. To honor our matriarchs, a peaked hat form welcomes visitors at the entrance of the building, a symbol of the strength, wisdom, love, and power that our women hold within our communities.
Waliok, we created this for you, always with you in mind. We created this for you, a place where art, language, love, gasalu, and all things are not separate, but one in the same spirit. MC Nogama.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. That was fantastic. Some really amazing work. Thank you for sharing it with us. My name is Alvin Huang. I'm the Director of Graduate and Post-Professional Architecture here at USC School of Architecture, and I'll be moderating the Q&A session here with Bruce. And I guess I'll kick off with a question of my own. I think one of the things that strikes me about the work that we're seeing here, Bruce, is the sort of integration of, let's say, kind of social, spatial, and environmental issues into form, right? Like these are all issues that are in some ways, in, let's say, lesser versions of architectural examples, oftentimes get resolved separately and then brought together. I think in your projects, we've seen very clearly that, let's say, there are spatial moves that are also at the same time environmental moves that result in kind of formal compositions that also, I think one of the things that really struck me was the campus building for Boston University, where each of the kind of components that you broke the building up into was, you talked about as being similar to a low-rise campus building in terms of its size and proportion. And it's actually a distribution of things that are broken up to actually feel more like a set of parts rather than a monolithic whole. And I think one of those things that struck me again was on the last project, thinking about that as it relates towards the Serpentine, where that was the one project which was more gestural, where the other projects were more compositional. But in the end, as the project evolved and the project was resolved, it actually became compositional. I would say, I guess my question is, at what point in the process does the issues of the, let's say, void spaces and composition of separate parts and their relationship to environmental control enter the process?
You know, it's that's such a, you know, thank you for that. I mean, that's a pretty good takedown. I think you have to do things simultaneously. And then on the flip side, you can't do everything all at once. And you do start often, you know, maybe with an idea or a sketch or an impulse, and it could be compositional or it could be gestural. And you begin to build out the idea from several points. One of the things someone said to me when I was designing a house, they said, you know, you really have to understand how we want to live. So that piece of it, which I'm not sure is taken as seriously as it should be, you know, in the broadest connotations of how we want to live together. It's like the theme of the Venice Biennale, you know, how will we live together? I think it's a great question, and it's a question of our time, and it has many scales and relationships. I've learned so much. So I think that part of it, what I've done is, I mean, part of the lecture was saying that, you know, we started with a very typological, kind of heterogeneous system of building from Kitchener City Hall and outwards, and making public space. But it wasn't influenced by hardly any of the issues that are influencing us today. And everything is kind of shifted. We went through, it's sort of like an evolution where you're constantly learning new knowledge, and you're producing buildings that actually demonstrate that new knowledge, hopefully. And over time, it becomes more orchestral, where you've got all these other great minds. I mean, that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned in architecture, that there are a lot of people who have some really great ideas, and a really great designer will actually be totally open and allow it to come to the project and engage and intersect. And you'll get something you would never have imagined if you play to the best of your starting point. I mean, I'd say something that although we've acquired like great knowledge in each of the disciplines, and you know, but you want it to all come together, but you literally don't do it. Usually there's an ideation, there's a sketch of some sort, or a model, something that you begin. It's a proposition, and then you debate that proposition. It goes through iterations. It's a wonderful process. It's a much better process today than it was. It was simpler several decades ago, but I don't think it was better. I think it's more responsive today. I mean, a lot of people are afraid that somehow architecture will lose its autonomy as a discipline, or lose its excellence as a discipline, because it's being contaminated by other issues. That I hear this, you know, like, why aren't we just talking about structure and form and, you know, skin? But once you start to interrogate what architecture is, you end up immediately confronting all the other issues which affect, you know, everything about a building. So the very definition of architecture has changed a bit, and in a good way. I think this is a great moment and for schools, I think it's a great moment where teaching would change, and you would kind of open up a different way of thinking about architecture that will produce, I think, different cities, different results, different kinds of integration. Like, you have to be pretty confident in the other people, like to work with artists or, you know, climate engineers. It's an eye-opening experience. I just realized that most of the projects I showed are collaborations with Transolar, and the early ones weren't. Okay, so big difference there. And then the later ones, and this is only increasing, much more consultative, especially in publicly funded projects in Canada. There's always a real desire to have Indigenous artists at the table, architects at the table, you know, not sort of in a kind of consultative role, but actually in an active role. And it's incredible because they're very creative. They have big ideas. And so I think it's like music and stuff. You're playing with different musicians, and the sound may be different, but it might be richer. It may be more complex. It's like jazz is like that, I think. I'm interested in those analogies where more than one single person is like, if you're just painting on a canvas, I get that. But one architecture is immediately involved with all these other sciences, arts, and social, environmental, political. And that's when it gets really interesting. And I don't think it's not so easy just to say, you know, well, architecture is architecture on its own, because I actually don't think it carries that much meaning on its own. I mean, my entire education was the Western canon. We were only taught about, you know, European architecture and American architecture and Canadian architecture, which was frankly imported architecture, colonial architecture from Britain, from the United Kingdom. You know, so this moment has just kind of busted all wide open, you know, to other ways of thinking around the world. And you find that many other cultures have thought about, you know, how to live together in better ways. And we have lots to learn from, I think, from some European countries, from Singapore for sure. You know, there are really interesting innovations that are happening that are really important lessons that we have to really open up to, not close down. Don't close down.
It's
I don't know,
interesting.
it doesn't really answer your question though. You know, but your question is a good one, because maybe there is no real answer. You know, it changes project to project. You just have to play, you know, within yourself. And, you know, we've done enough buildings that we understand a lot of things, and we're just open to all the challenges of not repeating ourselves, but actually engaging what we think are the significant issues of our time.
Right. It's interesting that you bring up Singapore, because I actually thought a lot of the work felt very, despite their locations, felt very Singaporean in some ways, in terms of the use of sky gardens and kind of roof terraces and the breaking up of volumes to kind of articulate these, you know, overhangs and you know, basically the transitions and thresholds between volumes become opportunities for whether it's environmental with an overhang or social as a kind of terrace. But in any case, if anybody has questions, please put them in the Q&A. There's a number of questions here already, and I guess I'll ask those to you right now. So the first question is from Mark Schiller. Well, actually, quite a few of the questions are from Mark Schiller. Mark is one of our building science faculty, and obviously has quite a lot of interest in environmental issues. And so he says, we greatly admire the Manitoba Hydro building. In every building, there are things we could learn. If we had some sort of post-occupancy evaluation, have you had the opportunity to study the performance of the building? Is there anything that stands out which you could do differently, or which you think will repeat as often as possible in future buildings or campuses?
Yeah, I mean, Manitoba Hydro is a giant science project, and there are two weather stations. One's on the high roof, one's on the podium. Transolar was commissioned to track the performance of the building for about 5 years after it opened. And it was right on target. We now have measurable results for the reduction in energy consumption. The target was something like 60%, but we're closer to 70% below our model National Energy Code building. But the real metric is that it reduced sick days 1.5 days per person per year, tracking over, it's now 10 years old, and there are 2,000 people working at it. And so there's always this attempt to kind of correlate that to productivity, which is really, really hard. But I would say the fact that people are coming to work more days than staying off and taking sick leave creates an opportunity for collaboration and productivity. And it's had a huge economic impact on the downtown of Winnipeg, which has really suffered. It brought those 2,000 people down, and it stimulated the local downtown economy. It changed the modal split. Before, when they were scattered over Winnipeg, they were in 14 buildings, driving cars onto surface parking lots. With the new building that's on the transit line, 95% of all the bus routes come right to our building. So the modal split switched. So now 75% are coming by public transit, 25% by car. So these are the ones we're watching, you know, transportation, sick days, and the kind of impact on the downtown and the local businesses. So all of those we've been monitoring year after year, and it's all trended really well. The pandemic really hurt the local businesses though, but it'll come back. I think it will come back to our building because our building is really seen to be the healthiest building in that city.
That's a fantastic way of actually doing a post-occupancy evaluation, is actually not on the performance metrics of the building, but on the performance metrics of the people that inhabit it.
Yeah, the building's easier than getting the performance metrics for the people. Like, how do you do it on new business development or, patents or research, or like on a hospital we did, what we realized is that we did a hospital, I didn't present it, but it's a fantastic project. And it reduced sick days in the hospital. They've studied that. And that's something that the Ministry of Health is very, very interested in, because hospitals are trying to get patients post-surgery out faster, or rehabilitation out faster. And it all comes out in Canada because we have a universal health system, that it all comes out of the public, funding. So they're very interested in creating hospitals that really drive wellness. And so we're trying to get metrics on that, but we've done some studies like that. I think that's impactful and really demonstrates, the quality of the design.
Next question, also from Mark. He says, and this is in reference to the Boston University project. He says, I'm delighted to see that the exterior surface articulation at the scale of louvers is varied by orientation. I'm surprised by how often architects claim that a facade is optimized for the sun and all orientations are identical. Yours are not, and I have a lot of confidence in Transolar. Can you tell me what was being optimized? Heat gain, overheating, daylighting, or all of the above?
It's all of the above. The diagonal, you're supposed to use horizontal louvers on a south and vertical on west and east. North is benign, they're all different. And we've done buildings like that, but we wanted a building that also really captured the dynamics of the kind of spiraling, even though it was on a square geometric rational floor plate. And so Transolar tested, the beauty of working with them is you can get real-time feedback on a proposition like those louvers. So they modeled it. And the diagonal was the compromise between the horizontal and the vertical, the horizontal south. And they said it's effective. So we have them where we want a lot of glass in bigger rooms, but the core to glass line is deeper. Where it's shallower, we then reverted to just lowering the actual percentage of glazing. So their offices, you get beautiful, floor to ceiling windows, but you don't get 100% glazing. You don't need 100% glazing in a 10 by 12 office. It would be too much light anyway. So they studied that. And with that, the university approved it, and it was modeled in terms of energy. It's triple glazed. We'll see. It's not Manitoba Hydro, though. It's a very different strategy because it's about visible sort of reduction of glazing vision to spandrel, and it's about visible solar shading, where Hydro's double glass wall. There aren't that many buildings. We're doing the few that are being done because they're expensive to build, because it's essentially, giving up, several feet on the perimeter with a double glazed exterior, single glazed interior with operable windows in both. One's on the building management system on the outside, and the other on the inside is manual. It's controlled by users. But, we've been challenged by people to say, why is that building all glass in a climate that can go to -40? And when it's -40 in Winnipeg, because it's double glass and because they're facing east and because they're facing west, they're really hot inside. It's like the greenhouse effect. Like the air temperature inside that double wall is really hot. You would feel very uncomfortable in it, and it radiates that heat into the building. People are extremely comfortable. Plus we have the exposed concrete slabs, we keep them at 19 degrees Celsius year round. Okay, it's a beautiful Transolar. You know, we work really closely with them. We modeled everything, and then we monitored its performance year after year after year. There's so many graphs about, you know, its energy performance week to week, day to day. It's fantastic. And then a year after we opened the building, the whole integrated team got together and we asked ourselves, you know, we had a lot to drink. We asked ourselves, what would we change? And the one thing everyone would change would be creating the double wall completely around the whole building. Like, there's some parts of the building when you don't have that double wall, we just have some triple glazing at the ends. And frankly, that was a kind of, you know, I drove that decision. I wanted the double wall to be seen almost as a kind of section at the end of one of the slabs. And actually, if I were doing it again, I wouldn't do that. I would do the double wall continuously, and the performance of our building would be even better. Like, it would be off the charts, because those ends that are only triple glazed are subject to swings in temperature. And the executives who got those great offices actually felt uncomfortable. They moved out of them, and they're just more part of the general office space now. So we learned from that. But other than that, everything, we wouldn't have even built a mechanical room. We didn't need one. There's hardly any mechanical equipment in it. There's no sheet metal, there's no ductwork. Like, it's absolutely incredible. It's opposite to what most people think a Class A office building is.
There's another question from Mark, so I'm going to skip down to this one, since we'll just keep on the kind of environmental side of things for to kind of center the conversation here for a little bit. He says AGS has louvers and view. Outstanding. Did you find an aspect ratio for the height and depth which shades the solar gain in summer but allows it in the winter? Or was it simply left to the efficient HVAC to deal with?
You know, I mean, that's an excellent question. I mean, it's you really have to model and study it, and you have to model it geometrically in terms of, you know, and there are a lot of good programs where you can look at, you know, daylight penetration and louvers, and you know, there are many forms of that. I mean, so it's a combo of modeling and running the simulations. And we do that with Transolar. I mean, that's the only way you can have sort of the evidence to convince your client that you're doing the right thing. And then you need the follow-up, the predict, you know, they can predict the comfort level inside the building based on the assumptions of glazing and solar shading. It's not rocket science, but they have their own proprietary software which does it very, very quickly. And so you're getting the feedback within 24 hours. That's really helpful design tool. And there are other crude tools that other people have, but the thing with Transolar is they have the software that can model the things you need in buildings, like windows that open, or sort of you know, geothermal and radiant cooling and heating. A lot of software doesn't model that. I mean, this was when we did Hydro, which is way back like 2000, you know, it opened in 2009, but the world has caught up, but they were way ahead, you know, because out of Germany, where actually engineering means something. I mean, if anything, Germany is a culture of engineering where it really is taken very seriously. And you know, Thomas Auer is a professor now at the Technical University of Munich, and that's a very high-ranking position in the culture of engineering. So they're physicists, they're scientists, they're not architects. But what you need to do, and I would say this for students, or you know, to really try to understand the principles of science and physics, and to don't turn away from them. You know, embrace them and incorporate them into the way you think formally in terms of design. It's just another thing that'll make, I think, better buildings.
Keeping on that topic for a second here, I've tried many times with clients in the past to work with Thomas and Matthias and TransSolar, and it's always been a tough sell on the client side in terms of them as an added cost outside of your normal typical consultants.
Yeah.
How does that work in terms of convincing a client that you should pay more money for a consultant that doesn't normally fall into the typical, delivery stream?
What happens is when the client is a long-term owner, the argument for long-term sustainability and the costs of operations and maintenance all of a sudden turns the argument. If in the private sector, it's very difficult to persuade developers who are looking for much faster returns on investment. So if you notice in our projects where we're doing the double walls for the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, and we're doing, for Manitoba Hydro, the business case for Manitoba Hydro was 20 years. And they calculated the reduction in energy. It was all predicted over, there's a big chart that went to the Board of Governors, right? Well, we're through half of that already. We're through 10 years. In 10 years, the whole thing is paid for itself. And by the way, as part of the business case, there's a line item for the entire replacement of the curtain wall. Curtain wall might have a life expectancy of what? You'll be lucky if it goes 20 years. Gaskets, all kinds of things happen. So that was really an argument that was not difficult to make. And same with the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. It's a government building. With BU, they own it for a long time, and they're very interested in really developing a net carbon neutral campus. Like a lot of American universities, the top ones are all shooting for that. And it's about time, and they have the resources. It's slightly different than Hydro. Hydro was, our clients were all engineers. They knew more about everything than we did. They're architects and engineers. They'd gone to Europe, they'd done their research, and they just wanted to have the right team to do the project. Whereas BU wants to make waves in terms of, being resilient and carbon neutral. And they see our building jump to the forefront because of that. In their, and I think for architects, you have to make the business case with every client and try to really understand what the true benefits are. I think now the pandemic, frankly, is going to change the way office buildings are. It's hard to imagine wanting to be in a hermetic building anymore.
Right. But it's also a really good point in terms of the difference, or let's say the difference in terms of motivations for different types of clients, because they're, let's say, developers that are looking at spec, or owner occupants that are looking at, like their bottom line is not at the point of return on the building, it's actually over the lifespan of the building.
I mean, what you've got to do is to create a new prototype for a workplace that has windows that open. It's really simple. It's totally flexible. Anything can go on. It's like we work with operable windows and fresh air, and because people don't want to go back into the way it was. It's not great. A lot of recirculated air. They filter it. They say it's good, but believe me, I don't think it is good. So, someone needs to jump out and demonstrate it.
All right, we have another question here. What's your approach for designing buildings? How do you find balance between designing a building that is both functional and efficient, but at the same time beautiful, that it welcomes the community to interact with it?
Well, isn't that the classic question? Functional and efficient, but beautiful, attractive. I think efficiency is related to utilization. When you think through sustainability deeply, that spaces that are used frequently and by have a lot of use are actually really efficient. Efficiency isn't just area, and a lot of people think it's just area. A lot of our buildings have fairly decent grossing factors, where you must get this, where you get a brief and the grossing factor is like 1.3 or 1.4. Someone just makes it up. But if you actually analyze all the really good buildings in the world that have generosity of common spaces, and you found the number, that'd be a really good research project. Like, what should the grossing factor be of a good building? I'd come back with that as the question. And then I think there should be a real study is what does multifunctional actually mean? You know, because a lot of things, there are only limited ranges of flexibility. This is my entire experience. Everything can't be everything else. And there are ranges. And it would be a brilliant study to understand what those ranges are. Like right now in Calgary, for example, they have a 30% vacancy rate in terms of commercial office space, 30%. It's the highest in North America. And they're now considering the conversion of those office buildings to residential. You know, is that flexible? Well, you've got to have windows that open. You know, our building code actually demands, like, why is it? I always ask this question, like, why is it that for residential apartments, you have to have a window that opens in a high-rise building, but in an office space, you don't? Like, I could never figure that out. Like, they're the same people. You go from one work to home. You know, it just seemed arbitrary. And a lot of it came out of, you know, building standards for constant temperature and humidity in the workplace, that it would always be the same temperature, 72 degrees Fahrenheit year round. And we know that with TransSolar and anyone who's really interested in sustainability, that you have to expand the comfort range. You know, you won't, you know, you put on a sweater or you dress accordingly. You know, I think all the standards are going to be re-examined for how we live and how we work. And that's the moment of change we're in right now. And it's exciting actually, because you know, things are not going to be exactly the way they were pre-pandemic. And there's going to be all, like, for example, the other thing I think is amazing, especially in our city, I don't know what's going on in LA, but they've removed curbside parking and there are all sorts of cafes. They're out. Like, you know what? That's the city I want to be in, all full time. So I would say look for the, you know, the future is latent in the present, and the really good designers will see what is actually happening and transforming today and project that into their work that will change the future.
Great. One last question. This one from Sasha Dells, one of our assistant professors. Sasha says, I appreciate the many digital and analog media you showed how your projects are represented, translated, and communicated. Sketches, models, printed plans, digital animations, movies, art, etc. How important are these different modes not only for representing the final projects, but also for the working process, particularly if you are a part of a diverse group of people, designers, and stakeholders?
Yeah, that's a great question too. That is really, really good. And you know, it's really the subject is communication, how people engage and understand architecture, which, you know, to say everyone understands it just isn't true, and everyone doesn't have the same level. You know, it's amazing actually. You know, some people can't read plans, and so I think you need all of them, because a lot of people really respond, I'm going to say, to physical models that are real. And I think that really good architects still make models because you can really see things. It's like you really feel things. It's sort of the building before the building, the act of building the model is sort of the act of building the building. There's so much virtual stuff. It's so sophisticated. It's so fast. It doesn't stay with you. You're just whizzing through things, environments, and then it's gone. And there's no memory of it. And so, you know, I think you really have to understand the people that you're working with and collaborating with first. And everyone has to come to the table and really discuss, you know, how you want to communicate, and you got to try things out. Like one of the things that I found that really kickstarts a lot of conversations, a lot of complex projects with like scientists or researchers, I've often asked them at the first meeting why they became a scientist, and you get amazing answers. Like, it's incredible. They don't expect it for the architect to come and say, okay, why did you become a scientist? And we found out things at the University of Lethbridge, like it was the man on the moon. When the United States put the man on the moon, that was inspiring. And then someone said Star Trek, and then we were all laughing because, William Shatner is Canadian actually, and he went up and down. But then there were other stories that came forward. And then we started talking about asking everybody to bring a single image for the project. And now you have people who never work with images, they work with numbers or formulas. And they actually brought some really interesting things to bear on the project. It has to somehow, and they had to speak about it. They had to speak for 2-3 minutes on why did you pick that, And we got these really, try it out. You'll find some really interesting responses, and people start to get engaged. And then we start, you go through the next level of ideation and modeling. And I think the more tools, the better. And we do a lot of Enscape modeling, but walking around in real time. But it's everything. It's not just one thing, multiple things.
Well, thank you, Bruce. And I guess I think we're gonna.
Thank you for those questions too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your time. And I'm gonna hand it over to Milton to close the evening.
Thank you, Alvin, and thank you, Bruce. We'll have to get you here in person. I think as you made the case, nothing like having in-person engagement. I think one of the things I find interesting about the conversation and the lecture is we often talk about the difference or the separation or the space between the client and the user, and then also kind of community engagement. And there's, I think in your just trying to kind of pinpoint where those things triangulate, I think the client engagement is user engagement, is community engagement. I think that's how you kind of formulated, the way that you're engaging with clients. And I think it's a really sophisticated and intellectually generous and a way of flattening the hierarchy by using your role and creativity as a designer to create platforms for conversations that don't make hierarchies out of client user gaps that often are quite wide. I can imagine that in some of the museum projects where you're developing museums for specific constituencies. But the community is invited to really be a part of that from the very beginning. So I really appreciated that. Thank you everyone for coming, and look forward to seeing you for a couple more lectures before we end out the term. So thank you. Have a great evening.